Welcome back to Ethics TV. And today I'm speaking with Prashant, who I have been virtually online connected to for several years now. We've had lots of conversations about lots of different things, some of which you can find at the Academy of Advanced Thought. Quite a few hours of content on there. And so Prashant and I reconnected recently online, and he proposed a topic for us to discuss, which we will. And Prashant, maybe over to you. What's the topic you would like to discuss?
Well, I mean, I've often for the last few years, I've been wondering, have we finally entered the post-ethical universe? I mean, where essentially, it's kind of it's that whole Dostoevskian idea that where there's no God, anything is allowed. But it's so have we finally reached this nihilistic post-ethical stage in our existence? And one of the things that led me to just looking at everything that's happening. For example, the other day I was walking down the street and I saw a bunch of protesters, Palestinian protesters, and one of the protesters was holding up a sign that said October 7th never happened, and that it was all staged by Israel and that kind of thing. Um, and it just struck me that people are just becoming more blatantly dishonest to get their end. A lot of whether you're on the left or the right. And there was that incident, I think, in Scotland where a male rapist was convicted of rape, and then at the last minute he could claim to be a woman and be put into a woman's prison and all that kind of thing. So I've long wondered about this, about whether we've actually finally transitioned to a point where, ethics are completely passé and this complete, postmodern, you know, make things up as you go along world that whether we finally reach that stage in our existence.
Hmm. It's interesting because I mean, pretty much every generation has seen that has kind of assumed that morality is in decline. And in ancient Judaism, there's the rabbis had a saying which is the earlier generations are to the current generation as men are to donkeys. And
Mm,
the Victorians imagined that people living before the Industrial Revolution were more respectful, civil, and honest. And then after World War One, Europeans look back at the Victorians as paragons of moral superiority. And there's a huge amount of surveys that have shown that in over 60 countries around the world there's this kind of the feeling of moral decline. And I'm interested by the paper which I think is called "The Illusion of Moral Decline" by Mastroianni and Gilbert, published in middle of 2023, maybe July 2023. And they had, like, I think N equals 12.5 million in
mm,
terms of raw data, showed that in those 60 nations, huge volumes believe that there's been this decline into a kind of a post-ethical age, whereas they from various different points of reference show that that is an illusion, and is a common illusion that happens throughout generations of us always feeling as if there's this decline. Um, do you feel, I mean, it's I'm tempted to feel that there's a bit of a grass is always greener feeling. And maybe there's a kind of a natural leaning for us to feel as if the good old days were in the past. But how empirical is this, would you say, or um, how attitudinal is this feeling?
well, I mean, the answer to your first question, how empirical is it? I wouldn't know. I wouldn't have. I'm not a data cruncher. However, in terms of attitudinal, I think there is something different here this time, because I feel that we do live in an age, and this isn't just about an idealized past, where where harking back to previous generations and all that sort of thing. I actually do think that both that there's I think that we have a significant class that's embraced convenience and corporatism much more than it ever has. I think I think digital culture is responsible for a lot of this. I think social media, digital culture, the fact that I think we live in a time where we have entertainment at the tip of our fingers. That's never happened before. It's like when you come to think of it, when you think of when you and I were growing up, it was about going to the theater, going to the video store, and there had to be a little bit of effort to get our entertainment. And now you have 6 or 7 streaming services you can choose from. And I'm not complaining about it, but because I use some of these myself, and it's kind of and there are certain factors. I think external aspects of our life. There have been external changes to our lives, which are pretty objective compared to what used to be the case. I mean, the fact that it's we don't really have to struggle as much as we used to, and I think that's made us a bit more impatient, a bit less disciplined, a bit more kind of just willing to give into our boredom and take the easy way out. And I think, and yeah, I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think this is just a grumpy old man talking.
Well, yeah, I think that if we look at evidential pieces around, literally in the last 10 minutes of us, last few minutes of us speaking, and for those watching, depending on your time zone, it's either the 18th or the 19th of August, 2024.
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi has literally just issued a statement in opposition to California's AI safety bill, saying that it's well-intentioned but ill-informed, and it's more harmful than helpful, which is something that could be, let's say, a data point of how we are living in a time that things of ethical morality could arguably be relative, and therefore one could say, ask, what is it relative to? Is in the Overton window shifting, are we starting to feel that something is more or less safe based on our familiarity of something versus an objective view of what is more or less safe or more or less morally right or more or less ethically true? Could we ever be objective? Are human rights, for instance, objective or subjective? When we speak of human rights, our human right to freedom, nowadays in 2024, we could say human rights to freedom could mean human rights to our own freedom to say what we want online, versus an objective view of human rights to freedom, which is almost an absolute. But then, does an objective view of ethical morality encapsulate any form of subjective view anyway? Because if it's subjective, it's a kind of a meta construct. So are we actually comparing here a subjective, real-time view of things through the lens of what could be objective and macro? Are we conflating these, not conflating, but are we unintentionally kind of buffering these two literally different contexts together?
Well, I don't know. There are, certain objective quirks. There are quirks showing up in everyday life. For example, today, there are activists that are actually fighting for your right not to discuss your weight with your doctor, because that's considered a form of fat shaming, or there are literally activists who are fighting for that. Yeah, and you've got Biden's. I think Biden's sort of the head of someone big in his Department of Health, someone high up, actually expressed the view that obesity is purely caused by genes, and that diet and exercise have no role to play in all that. Or it's just a support. It's just a bit of support that you. But obesity is all genes. So I mean, that's obviously to promote Ozempic and all that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot. There's a lot. I think at the amongst the people who run things, there's a lot of this sort of nihilistic opportunism going on.
Mm.
All of healthcare is being run by the pharma industry, pretty much. I think you can pretty much say that.
Yeah,
And
I think that wouldn't be too conspiracy theory based. If you look at the monetary flow,
yeah,
purely empirically now, so with no opinion whatsoever stated on top of it, the monetary flow of where campaign donations go, where funding of hospitals and also funding of medical programs and shareholding between, well, if you look at the shareholder mix of,
yeah.
so at the end of the day, there is a certain link and influence that comes with that link between the pharmaceutical and healthcare world. So yeah, I think we're beyond needing to even caveat that. I think we're there now.
And then it's the sort of thing. I mean, how do you have an appointment with your doctor without discussing your weight, right? That's one of the key. That's one of the starting points.
Mm.
Whether you're overweight or even if it hurts your feelings, you need to know if you're overweight or obese. I mean,
So do you in the nihilistic agenda angle, do you feel that what could be and I'm asking this slightly as I'm playing devil's advocate somewhat here. What
hmm.
would be the agenda underpinning the woke movement?
Here's the thing, though. I mean, I think I don't think anyone sat at an organ and with an evil conscious plan. I think things have just evolved into the state of chaos. I think it started out in academia with all these weird subjects like cultural studies taking over the humanities and making everything subjective and just piling on and with all that sort of school of philosophy that was represented by people like Foucault and Derrida and all that kind of thing. And that's basically just kind of spilled over into everyday life and made life somewhat absurd. I think you could, it's the, it's the,
So,
it,
so it's a gradual, it's the frog in the saucepan with the heat gradually being turned up versus,
yeah,
yeah. So it's the I mean, if we looked at it from a nuanced perspective, one aspect will always be education and a the trickle down impact of what's being constructed as our education frameworks. And the other, I guess, is our input mechanisms that we get from media. Therefore, we have the press. Therefore, we have celebrity culture, and therefore we have branding, which comes with it, advertising. And then we have merged in between that the political agendas. So there's a map one could imagine that over time either is some form of evil plan,
yeah.
architecture, orchestration, or is a gradual creeping reality that can be opportunistically nihilistic.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I tend to look at reality as a satirist rather than some sort of romantic who sees good and evil. I see human folly. I mean, I'm far more tuned into human folly, and what I see is a great deal of it. And I think the weird world that we live in right now various aspects of it have probably been predicted by Monty Python, actually. So, when especially the life of Brian, but I want to be called Loretta. That
Yeah.
whole, when they're going into the whole, in the theater, and I want to have babies, and we're going to fight for his rights to have babies.
It's
and
it is bizarre how much one could draw parallel, how many parallels could be drawn between Life of Brian and 2024. Or The Simpsons, actually, for that matter. But do you feel that the Life of Brian is, from, like, if we look at Michael Palin and John Cleese and Eric, do you feel that they, as satirists, were making observations about a future state, bearing in mind Life of Brian was, I don't know, 40 years ago? Were they talking about a future state 4 decades forward, or were they talking about the way we were then anyway?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be sort of the fly on the wall when John Cleese is going through his media feed and looking at it, and just having a bit of a snicker. No, I actually think that they were just having a bit of innocent fun at the time, and at some point they probably, most of them, just opened up their, started going through the news and, wow, didn't we actually, are we now prophets? Or
In a similar way to where I think Donald Trump becomes president in a Simpsons episode, 10 years before it actually happened. I'm thinking, I'm wondering whether there's, one could argue that the only difference between conspiracy and reality is time.
Yeah.
Could argue that the only difference between satire and reality is time.
Yeah.
If we were to assume that everything that's possible is possible, but then you'd have to have kind of guessed correctly to feel that the way we could live now is something where there is even such a news feed as to say that someone identifies himself, a 55-year-old man identifies himself as a young girl, therefore should be able to go into the toilet of a school that's for girls. The fact that that's an agenda item, that a news item now, is something that would be harder to predict, I imagine, 20, 30, 40 years.
Well, the problem, though, I think my argument, if someone were to tell me that, is my objection would not be to people who suffer from genuine gender dysphoria and who have some sort of confusion within. My problem would be with the opportunists, men who are actually men who want to take advantage of such things. And I think in this world that we live in, such men, they're not an insignificant minority. They're probably a minority, but they'd be significant enough to cause concern. To, let's say, if you can just make it, I feel like a woman, I identify as a woman, therefore I'm a woman, if you can just go to, say, a gym and tell them at the desk that, oh, I identify as a woman in spite of you being obviously male, and they're obligated to allow you to use the women's facilities. You could just be a man. You could be lying to them. And
I relate to that strongly. I'm concerned in the abuses of power in general. And with, as Jack Parsons said in 1946, freedom is a powerful but yet dangerous sword. On one hand, you have liberty, on the other hand, you have responsibility. And so I used to be concerned about the police force in general. Being someone of color and where I was brought up, it was sometimes quite a dangerous situation. But then over time, I realized that I'm not actually concerned about police in general. I'm concerned about people who become a police person so they can wield power against particular minorities, let's say. And I'm actually not concerned about politicians in general. I'm concerned about those that use the political medium to wield influence and power in ways that are inhumane.
I think perhaps there's an objective, there's a place of objectivity here. I think there's a managerial class, a technocratic class that's running things that doesn't look at all these complexities that might arise. It's the kind of thing, I mean, look at, for example, multiculturalism. Right on paper, a brilliant thing. Let people from different cultures, but, you know, it's like, it's turning out to be a form of ghettoization, about creating different ghettos of different communities and different cultures and keeping them apart. Because I don't think it's intended, but because there's a rather shallow managerial class, a technocratic class, if you will, that simply wants to have these processes and in place, and doesn't want to look into the complexities underlying all of this sort of thing.
Yes, so it's the construction of unnecessary bureaucracy for the point of having unnecessary bureaucracy that in and of itself is there to create a lattice work that behind which one can do things that are obscured.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Yes, this is a real. I personally believe that that's a real thing, and I've observed in some hierarchies, and for this example, let's take the healthcare system. I'm convinced that you're not meant to understand how health insurance truly works, and the link between health insurance and healthcare provision and pharmaceuticals. You're not meant to. And there's a very good reason why you're not meant to. And similarly to sort of way that political parties work, and let's take the USA for an example. The tripartite state of the Senate, the House, and the White House, the administration component, the legislation component, and the arguably the debating component. One could say that is shown to the public so that they understand the three parts at play. Whereas anyone who reads more than 2 articles further down the line would understand a wider infrastructure. And this is even before we get into the deep state discussions. I'm just talking about the subtleties in the whip role and the lobbying role and the influence between donations and the companies in which those donations come from and the shareholding of those. It doesn't require any conspiracy theory to look into that.
I mean, yeah. I mean, when I don't like that word deep state because it had all these cartoony connotations. It's all, I mean, what they refer to the deep state has always been there. It's just a massive muddle that runs things for us.
Yes.
It's just, it's got no, it's something we have to put up with, but it's not, it's not like, it's not like a bunch of evil overlords, trying to put together their evil plans and building doomsday devices. That's
well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because firstly, on the deep state side, I mean, there is the most recent media version of that on YouTube is that's kind of when the CIA was invented. So there's the modern narrative of this. You're right. There is what people can see and then what people can't see, and I reckon that's been the case since humankind began. But then in terms of the term evil and overlord, my question to these points is evil on whose definition? Overlord over whom? Are we saying, and so it's very easy to label something as the elite or as evil overlords or the system, but we have to be, or not have to be, but I would encourage a greater level of critical thought and definition as to what it is that we are classing as. For instance, one could say the elite, and that means 2 different things. If you're homeless and penniless, Elite is someone who is living in a council affordable housing with running
Right.
water. That is relatively the elite. If you are a school teacher, the elite is someone who is over the breadline. And if you are someone who is a millionaire, the elite is someone who's a billionaire. Then in terms of evil, that's where I think things get even more tricky, because it's not even just relative to position. It is completely subjective to your view of what is for the personal and common good in a short period of time or a long period of time. And if in doubt, zoom out. So one could argue that the creation of weapons of mass destruction are peacekeeping devices if you zoom out long enough. And one could argue that weapons of mass destruction are the most evil weapons on this earth because of their potential. And so, yeah, I do wonder with these terms, the blanket terms, whether there's subtleties.
I mean, the Nazis and ISIS would be obvious evil, right? There'd be no doubt about that. You can't put a subjective, you can't be subjective about something like that. So that's really a dark side sort of thing. I think in most cases, I think we tend to brand things as evil too easily. We tend to jump to conclusions and get excitable and all that sort of thing. But let's say, for example, when a Yazidi woman who has been held hostage by ISIS as a sex slave by ISIS, for example, she probably just, if she heard what a lot of us in relatively privileged Western societies describe as evil, she'd probably have a really good laugh. Or, it's I mean, look, there's all kinds of wild ideas floating about. Like, for example, right now, people are talking about the Islamicization of Britain, and it's like you think it's only 6% of the British population is Muslim. Of that, the radicals constitute probably 1%. Do you think it's really that much of a threat, right? You might have a few fanatics saying outrageous things, but most of the Muslim population probably doesn't even support them. And it's the kind of they're probably just frightened of them, and therefore they keep quiet. And
so evil. So actually, that threat is subjective to your. Whereas one could argue that you are saving the world if you save one person's livelihood, because through their perspective, the world has changed for the better. So, and if you're walking down a dark alleyway, one person who is potentially an attacker is 100% a risk. But if you extrapolated it to the whole population, they're actually a very low risk, because there's 8 billion people and that's only one person. But if you're in an alleyway with one person, then 100% of people are a problem.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, I think people tend to magnify things. It's like everything, whether it's a left talking about white privilege, whether it's the right talking about multiculturalism destroying our way of life. It's like, what is your way of life anyway? It's sort of, I mean, a lot of, people have this idealized view of what life was like in the 50s. And when in fact life in the 50s, if you had to think of Europe, it was probably lots of rationing, lots of austerity.
Yeah. I mean, from speaking to my parents, I mean, my adoptive father grew up in the Second World War, and so he came back from school one day and his entire neighborhood had been blown up with all the
exactly.
So he arrived back to his house, and it was a bomb site. So that's real. And if you imagined that in 2024, I mean, the nearest we could get to it, arguably in the Western world, is 9/11, where you turn on the news, if you're lucky enough to not actually be there, you turn on the news one morning and see that this happens, or see what's reported. And I feel that there's a on one hand, we look back at the good old days and how things were more refined. On the other hand, only just one generation before me, people of my ethnic origin were given a proportional representation of a vote, kind of 20% of the vote. And so, and around about that time as well, women were obviously second-class citizens.
Right.
And so, yeah.
And it was a crime to be homosexual until very late till very late, almost the 60s. When was it not? When was it decriminalized? When was homosexuality decriminalized?
I'd need to look into it, but from a race perspective and from a gender perspective, away from sexual preferences, it's a very near-term shift. Then, of course, that leads in that part of the rabbit hole is whether or not the ability for people of my ethnic background to be able to have a vote, does that mean that any form of racism has lessened? Has any gender discrimination lessened? Has the woke agenda, for instance, and the bringing forward of non-binary definitions, does that mean that we are any less othering of people because we are able to classify differently? Does reclassification equal lack of discrimination?
So I would put a paradox in front of you. I would actually say that wokery, through its good intention, is creating a sort of paradoxical, sort of bizarro racism of its own kind by perpetuating the same categories, but in a different sort of way. And
I believe that.
The very fact that the word BIPOC, for example, the most absurd term I've ever heard, and I've fallen into that category of BIPOC. You're just putting a whole bunch of people who have different historical experiences and cultural experiences into a single bucket. Myself and a Mexican would be brown, apparently. I mean, I think that whole thing is rather absurd. And when you refer to me as a person of color, well, that's what I'd be referred to in apartheid South Africa. So how is this different? And I mean, there's a chap called John McWhorter. He's an African American and brilliant, but he's liberal. But he talks about how African Americans are infantilized by woke culture, and how the diversity of viewpoints within it's always assumed that there's a single Black viewpoint or a single Latino viewpoint, or a single Muslim viewpoint,
and it's that's a whole topic in and of itself. So let's go there. I mean, it can only be seen, well, either it's complete ignorance to feel that an entire culture has one view, or it's supremely arrogant.
Right.
And I feel not too dissimilarly about being able to completely be certain that there is one particular God that created absolutely everything, would require either a supreme ignorance or a supreme arrogance, depending on your viewpoint. And it would be the same as saying that everyone who is of this culture is right, everyone of that culture is wrong, or everyone of that culture has this opinion, everyone of that culture has, and what that does, the lowest common denominator of thought, is simplifies things so it's easy for us to categorize. As George Clooney says in Up in the Air, when he's walking in an airport and he in the movie Up in the Air, and he says to his work colleague, we should stand behind those Asian people going through the conveyor belt because they wear slip-on shoes. And,
Right.
and the work colleague says, that's racist. And he says, no, I'm like my mother. I generalize because it makes things more efficient. And, and it's like, there's no difference between that statement as saying there's a black person on the street, they're likely to be a criminal.
Yeah.
Or
Or listen to hip hop.
or listen to hip hop, or there's an Indian person, therefore they're either going to be Hindu or Muslim, because you can only be one of the two.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I get the. It's fun. It's funny. It's sort of whenever I've been to the. I think there are these disturbing developments. They're starting to in my social life. I'd go to these parties full of trendy people, liberal people with liberal, progressive opinions, and the moment I was, the moment they realized I was Hindu, they say, "Oh, what do you think of Modi?" I said, "Like, I haven't thought of. I don't actually. I mean." I don't. It's got nothing to do with me. I'm a Canadian citizen. It's got nothing to do with me.
But you're meant to have an opinion of
Yeah,
it's people in the same way as when I say that I'm going to the UK, people say hello to the king, as
yeah,
if that there's an automatic allegiance to a monarchy.
mm,
And also potentially in the UK, perhaps because it's so bloody small, you're meant
yeah.
to be actually shoulder to shoulder with the same monarchy due to the fact that it's you're on their doorstep.
Right. Yeah. It's and then there's the kind of the person who when they find and when they find out that you're Muslim, oh yeah, we stand for your right to wear the hijab and all that sort of thing. And there's it's like, it's none of your business. You shouldn't be commenting on something you don't know very much about, right? I mean, there's Iranian women getting arrested because they refuse to wear the hijab. So, just either read up
Hmm.
on the complexities of the subject or stay out of it.
That and so going full circle to where we started here on the illusion of morality or the factual based of a decline of morality, is it the case potentially that we are becoming, due to, let's say, the increase in ability of modern connected technology, it's not that things are worse or better now, it's that opinions are more obvious because they're more shared.
Yeah, that most definitely. I think there was a time when you probably wouldn't know what the people around you thought, or there's social media around you. There's no social media and all that sort of thing. But I mean, that said, I mean, are we also consuming way too much information, more than we should in this day and age? Maybe people then didn't consume as much information and didn't really think about these things.
Uh,
Or
I mean, my 2014 TED Talk in Portugal was only about that point, and that my view is, and it hasn't changed in 10 years,
hmm,
which is unlike me because my views tend to modulate as the weeks go by as I continue to read more more stuff. But my view on this particular point is it remains static until proven otherwise, and that is that what happens as more information increases is not necessarily more signal, it's definitely more noise. If
yeah,
anything, it makes it harder to find the signal due to the volume of noise. And that seems to be a truth that I can't find a good enough challenge to that truth.
yeah. I think I remember seeing that talk of yours actually.
Yeah.
That's yeah, it's sort of, I mean, this year has been a year of heavy reading. I've read quite a bit of Iris Murdoch and Dostoevsky and all that sort of thing. And I realized that wow, something has been resurrected within me. Let's say that I seem to have lost over the past few years.
Hmm.
And a sort of centering of myself has started to take place, I feel.
Hmm.
So because I mean, I found my first center. I found myself first being centered while exploring literature. And there's something through that activity, the narratives, the paradoxes, the complexities, just delving deep into the human condition. And the Iliad was the first such book for me, and that kind of thing. oddly, the first work of Western literature. That was the first. That was what started. Well, I said, "Wow, this is interesting." I mean, it's not just telling a story; it's going into something deeper about the human condition and all that sort of thing. And that was when I started reading all the novels of Huxley, for example. And I still count Huxley as one of the influential figures in my life, influential thinkers, particularly because he spoke about how we are made to love our imprisonment. I mean, it's the ultimate form of totalitarianism when essentially you submit. You know, you live in a gilded cage, and you allow essentially. I mean, you give yourself over completely to pleasure and stimulation, and that's the kind of thing. But I also thought Huxley was outside of Brave New World. He was a tremendous thinker. I thought he was a visionary. He saw a lot of what was happening in the world. I think his novel Eyeless and Gaza are one of the great masterpieces. If you have you read it?
Yeah, of course.
And I think for me, that was one of the great masterpieces. And so is Island. And although that was more of a utopian novel, but Island was another great masterpiece. So it's that kind of thing. But I think I used my connection to literature as an example of what you call signal. And again, I found myself while reading the Brothers Karamazov, all the many directions it takes you in, rather than just filling you with a deluge of things. It takes your mind. It's this mind expanding experience.
Right. And interestingly, I completely concur with this. There's so much to unpack there from a literary point of view. I don't know. I'm so tempted. There's so many rabbit holes to go down just from what you just said. But
right.
But in the same way as people sometimes arrive into Indian scriptures through a white American guy, Ram Dass, I will take
right.
that. If that's the entrance to the rabbit hole, great. If the entrance to a centering is the Iliad, then great. If people view Life of Brian as almost a soothsaying creation, you could start there versus George Orwell. Both arrive at the same kind of place. It just depends on how dark and how you like your humor delivered, or how tragic you like your comedy.
I think it'd be interesting to be sitting across from John Cleese and popping the question to him. But were you thinking about the future when you wrote this? You'd probably get a cackling laugh, I think.
Well, I follow him on X, and I feel that he is definitely now basically finding this. I think I've only met him once, and in a lift in
Right.
Sydney,
Wow.
in an elevator in Sydney, in the Four Seasons, and we both happened to be going down to the ground floor, and I had a wonderful few minutes conversation with him, and I misused the time. I should have asked him these questions.
Well, what do you do in a situation like that? I mean, at the end of the day, you don't have the time to think about what you're going
That's
to do.
right. So I was completely meaningless, and but I suspect from looking at what he says online that he is partly looking at current times with a humorous guffaw, and also a tragic forehead slapping moment of you had one job, humanity. And Elon Musk said on Lex Fridman a few weeks ago that when asked about whether aliens had or walk amongst us or had existed over time, I'm super paraphrasing here, but one of his offerings was that maybe in fact they have realized that this particular civilization is destined for extinction so rapidly anyway, there's no bloody point.
Well, I mean, it's that song from The Meaning of Life that, remember that there's and pray that there's intelligent life somewhere up in space because there's bugger all down here on Earth. That kind of.
That's right. I think I'm interested in the centering moments that you're having, and how they're manifesting. This point of the demise or post-ethical era driven by or leading to nihilistic opportunism, is that something that is a manifestation or a natural outcome of this new centering of yours?
I mean, it's just I think I'm just starting to delve into some rather pleasurable depths. For example, Brothers Karamazov, for example, the sort of love between Dmitry and Grushenka. That I don't think we have anything in the media that goes into that sort of emotional depth. And one of the things I was thinking of was I don't think any of the current Hollywood sets
No.
would have the talent to play these roles.
No, they're too subtle. The roles are too subtle, and one of the things that I'm noticing with not just, I mean, let's say Hollywood, but by Hollywood we mean the entire output of media in general. So we're including the Netflix productions and Apple TV and Amazon Prime and everything. What I've noticed is that now, when someone kisses someone, they immediately have sex, regardless of where they are. So it's kiss then sex. When someone is angry, they immediately smash something.
Right.
And and there is no subtlety. And when I think I showed my son Die Hard 7 years ago, and I didn't realize that the first 12, 15 minutes of Die Hard, almost nothing happens. Like in the current version of things happening. In the DC Marvel universe of bang, 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 there's death, sex, destruction, fire. And then in the first 12, 15 minutes, Die Hard, it's background. And same as Terminator, it's like this immediacy expectation of someone meets someone, they kiss, then they have sex, then they break up, then they get back together again, then have sex, then someone dies, and then have sex, and it's like the immediacy and lack of subtlety supports your I think 100% accurate assumption that the Hollywood industry now couldn't pull off a work of a visual version of the literary works that you're reading, because the subtlety of the relationships is too much.
I mean, do you think there's anyone in Hollywood who can pull off Hamlet, for example? Probably not.
Not of the newer school. From the older school, for sure. The Anthony Hopkins, who I've actually seen in a Shakespearean context on stage, can absolutely pull off even Richards.
That said, I think was it Peter Capaldi? He's an interesting sort of actor. He's one of the neo Doctor Who's.
Yes,
and
I think Peter Capaldi, who's also in some fantastic satirical work in the past.
Yeah.
I think there's an actor called Andrew Scott who played Moriarty in the new Sherlock Holmes or recent Sherlock Holmes. Andrew Scott, I think, has an artistic capability, if given the script with subtlety, to do what we're talking about.
Also, the young actress who played Clara in Doctor Who, she's an interesting one. I mean, she's intense. I think Peter Capaldi and she could do Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. That would be an interesting pairing.
It would. That's a good call. People like us should run the industry, right? But I think the macro point or the meta point here is that is it that the creators, the studio creators, are not casting? Is it that the talent doesn't exist, or is it that the studios aren't commissioning that work, or is it that the audiences are not demanding that type of material?
I mean, the other question you could ask is, have our emotions become too shallow? Or, Are we preoccupied with just really shallow surface self-pity rather than actual pain? Or, I think that kind of thing. Actual pain would actually scare us more than anything else.
For sure. And I think that that's one of the conclusions. And I know that well, Mastroianni, what the co-author of the paper in 23 that I referred to, the illusion of moral decline, is someone I would like to have be a guest on Ethics TV. So I will say this and caveat in advance of saying what I'm hoping to ask the co-author. But my view of his paper, The Illusion of Moral Decline, is that we would come to fast conclusions due to our lack of looking deeply enough into the questions. And so well, they attest, or they conclude that it is an illusion that we are in moral decline, but the illusion is caused by a all surface, no feeling generation that will look at the nearest or the lowest possible common denominator of a thought or an idea virus that someone says on TV and then adopt it as their own view.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine what, getting back to a Yazidi sex slave would think if she heard someone today just say, "Oh, I need a mental health break," or
Because someone unfollowed me on Instagram, therefore I need to take a mental health break, and you can't not give me that, otherwise I will sue you and win.
Yeah, it's like, oh, right.
Yeah, I mean there's an interesting snowflakeness here, because on one hand I think some people can abuse the calling card of mental health and use it to their favor by hiding laziness inside it.
And there's an industry that's more than willing to accommodate that, indulge all this. It's that kind of...
But that's before there's any reactionaries watching this who think what I'm saying is that there are no mental health issues. I just need to add a secondary part to that statement, which is that is not to say that there is not an increase in mental health issues. The fact that it can be abused by some does not argue again, it does not present a strong enough argument to describe the increase in suicidality. So these things are two very different contexts. One is an abuse of power. The other is the increase in mental health challenges, which I personally believe are correlated to the way that digital media operates.
But then, on the other hand, it seems that these mental health challenges, okay, so someone who's reached the highest level, let's say an elite sports person who travels the world doing what they love, suddenly feels the need to take a mental health break, and they can afford to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But say someone who just works as a project manager at a digital health agency, completely meaningless job surrounded by complete assholes, or that kind of thing. They don't have that luxury, really.
No.
And I mean, there's disparity, and it's so.
Well, the disparity can also be there's a woman and a 5-year-old child working in a carbon mine whilst we're recording this, and they're working in a carbon mine, and the mine they're working 12, 14 hours a day. They're breathing in the residue that means that their lifespans are extraordinarily shortened. The mine is owned by the same companies that are selling the material to the big technology firms, of which we are using the equipment of to make this video, arguing about ethics on devices that are directly linked to slave labor. So we are inside to some extent, a vortex or a vacuum-like entity where we are fortunate enough to hypothesize about ethical issues?
Well, it's it's kind of like the people who live stream Greta Thunberg rallies and then upload them onto YouTube. And there's a paradox right there. Look at all the infrastructure you're using and all the unsustainability of the whole action of, oh, I was there to see Greta.
I mean, it's slacktivism in its broader sense. Equally, I don't think many. That's too general. It wouldn't surprise me if the majority of people who own electric cars have not looked in to the issues in creating lithium-ion batteries.
Well, it's like Biden made the kind of a really absurd statement that he wanted all of America to have electric cars by 2050 or something. And don't these people think before they talk? It's sort of like it's Monty Python happening right there. That's like something out of Monty Python.
Oh, yes,
It's like
back to John Cleese looking at any form of political statement and going, wow, these guys are actually writing the scripts for our own Monty Python.
it's
And the problem is that I'm not quite certain whether or not there's more kind of flying circus stuff or Life of Brian or the kind of you pick your Monty Python moment. It's like which
well,
yeah.
or any of the derivatives, Time Bandits. You could go into Time Bandits territory. You could have John Cleese as Robin Hood, and doing the whole thing. Oh God, what awful people! Sort of.
That's right. I think in general we have right now. I personally have a suspicion that there are multiple things happening at the same time, and it would be disadvantageous to look at only one thing at a time instead of parallel. So for sure, we have an increase in comparison due to weapons of mass communication, where people who are like 12-year-olds feel as if they're not enough, their lips aren't big enough, their boobs aren't big enough, or their whatever. At the same time as seeing a career opportunity and having an OnlyFans where they take their clothes off and make money, at the same time as people who are more able to be connected to each other to form movements for good, be that digital rights, ethical rights, online privacy agenda, at the same time as an overly aware public of statements of chief execs and senior executives and politicians, whereas in the past, a messenger on horseback would come with a scroll. Now, someone says something off microphone, and it's all over the web. We are also carrying around 4K HD 24 frame second video cameras that have the same quality of recording as something you equally watch on any form of device. So if you add all of those things together, it's almost disingenuous to ask whether or not we're living in a post-ethical time as a binary question of yes or a no, because we are and we're not, depending on the question, the depth of the question. I love this. There's a business card that Hugh MacLeod, one of my favorite cartoonists, wrote that says something like, and I'm paraphrasing, something like, please score yourself on the level of abstraction, how intelligent you would like our conversation to be. 0 is completely meaningless and trivial, and 10 is completely obscure, post-realist, and you kind of pick the discussion,
But that said, I think the emergence of echo chambers, now that's another factor to consider. And people are willing now only to talk to the echo chambers of which they're a part, not to anyone outside. There's no desire for dialogue, with the result that they're only too willing to misrepresent truth than ever before, or give both sides, or talk about nuance. So it's that kind of thing, and I think that in a sense is post-ethical, because if you want to put forward an idea, you should give all sides of the story. To be completely its complete ethicality would require you to give all sides of the story. But it's like you basically have some sort of left-wing gathering, and you go and tell them that Israel concocted October 7th, and they'd all just nod without questioning,
Right.
and that kind of thing.
Okay.
So it's open line. In the past, I do think that they would lie, but they try and make the lie appear convincing. Now there's not even there isn't even an attempt of yeah, we'll just lie to do what we want to do.
So is that laziness? Is the lack of critical thinking laziness? Is that
I think I think amongst the activists, there's some of that. I think if you're the beta in that conversation, it's probably laziness. If you're the alpha, there's a bit more malevolence. I just want to put forward my agenda no matter what.
Yes, and Machiavelli's Prince speaks to this quite well. There's a characteristic that is inherently abusive.
Yeah.
In as much as a wolf in sheep's clothing is abusive, and I feel that because of our connection, our digital connection to one another, it is quite simple, relatively simple, relative to history, to put together tribes of people who are followers, who will believe anything, not because they are necessarily more or less intelligent than the past, but because we're able to find those people more easily and connect to them more simply. You can create a tribe of 10,000 followers who believe that there's that yellow plants are some form of alien. But whereas in the past, 100 years ago or 50 years ago, to find 10,000 people who believe that yellow plants are aliens would be magnificently complicated. Now you put a post on Reddit and wait.
Right. Well, I mean, even wasn't there the case of what was the ridiculous academic paper that got submitted and accepted about rape amongst dogs and dogs in parks or something,
I was actually going to use the analogy of Scientology, to be honest. That's where I was hoping we could use dog rape with the
I think it actually got accepted or for publication. What was it about? Was it actually about rape amongst dogs in parks or?
Yeah, there was I think there was it was a hoax essentially.
Yeah.
And it was a 2018 situation that happened, and I think it was maybe about June, July, or maybe May, May 2018, and a writer called Helen Wilson. Actually, if you people anywhere watching this, you can go online and find Taylor and Francis online, where is an article, but also the New York Times, 4th of October, speaks about this. And the hoax that was out there was I believe, to test how ridiculous something could be that slips into scientific journals. And I fear that there's not too much of a stretch between that and telling the public, take this vaccine, even though it's not been tested, you have to, otherwise you can't travel. There's not a great step between the hoax to the hoax of the dog journal to take this back. It doesn't matter that it hasn't been tested, but yes, that's the way science works, but not this time. And you're not a zillion miles away from saying that everyone with blue eyes is superior and everyone with brown eyes is inferior. These things aren't very different to one another.
Yeah, it's. I've worked in pharmaceutical marketing, so I've worked with the devil, so to speak, and I was part of the team that originally helped Pfizer come out with this drug for fibromyalgia,
Mhm.
and the amount of shenanigans they were up to prove that fibromyalgia as a separate condition
Mm.
from as opposed to simply just another form of really chronic pain
Mm.
was really worth, because because the Europeans weren't buying it. They said no, but Pfizer wanted that indication for that drug. They wanted to be the first to have that an indication. So they practically, I think, I wouldn't say it because I don't know if there's liabilities here, but it seems like to me that there was an element of them inventing a condition.
Well, you're successful when you get a cease and desist, and I asked for a takedown notice. I remember that in Powered by Change, I knew that it was likely to become a bestseller when the chief exec of Blockbuster Video, as was,
Yeah,
his lawyers sent me a cease and desist for Powered by Change. This is the part of Powered by Change
right.
where I wrote about the complete and utter travesty of running a business where the chief exec of Blockbuster looked at Netflix and said, "That model, your model's never going to work. People will always rent videos in boxes from us." And I said, "This is a crime against business. It's the crime against innovation and these, anyway." So he wrote me a cease and desist letter. His lawyers wrote a cease and desist letter. And my lawyers wrote back from the publishers, in fact, not even my lawyers, the publishers, my publishers' lawyers wrote back saying, if there's anything that's inaccurate, we'll retract. But you have to tell us exactly what's inaccurate. And he's
Yeah.
and his lawyers just went silent, and the rest is history.
Well, my novel has this part, it's not published yet, but it's got this bit where a pharmaceutical company has found a cure for mucophilia, which is nose picking. And that's sort of my, maybe I could be the next Monty Python, the predictor of the future. We could have a drug out there that, you know,
Well, I mean, but your book, The Unruly Times, I think is as predictive as anything. I mean, if anyone's
oh,
watching,
yeah, no, the one I sent you was this, the draft I sent you was the manuscript I sent you was the one I'm talking about.
right,
It
that
had,
was brilliant. That draft's excellent, and
yeah.
I think you're only Terry Gilliam away from Monty Python. You're
Speaking of Monty Python, I had my Michael Palin moment, like you had your John Cleese moment in New York in a bookstore, and likewise I messed it up by saying something which annoyed him, and the thought I had in my mind is, wow, I've just irritated the nicest man on the planet because I literally think of Michael Palin as the nicest man on the planet.
right.
Uh,
And to be honest, with John Cleese, what I should have said was any of the above that we've mentioned. What I actually said was that I went to see a Faulty Towers restaurant show, and
yeah.
I was overtly gushing about how good this knockoff Faulty Towers was.
I think, yeah, mine was, I was waiting. I was, I just bought his book and I'd taken along with me my disc set of Around the World in 80 Days to
Brilliant,
get them signed. Brilliant documentary.
brilliant.
I think the episode of the Tao is one of the great moments of documentary filmmaking
I agree.
ever.
I agree.
And anyway, so he signed both of them. So I thought, like, I'm here. Let's see if I can get a great man to laugh to at least. And I just said, wow, it looks like this has been a vigil. So the vigil of Saint Michael or something. And he just kind. I just thought, wow, um,
That's so crass. No, it's not. It's so it's as bad as me basically saying that the knockoff version of Faulty Towers run by amateurs is better than the original. It's almost as bad as what I did with John Cleese.
I, I mean, I think it would be hilarious though if at some point in the future, um, let's say I'm a writer and I end up running into Palin at some point. And he said, "Oh yeah, I remember one episode in particular when some idiot came up to me in New York and said this was Vigil of Saint Michael.
I really hope that it lives within him to this day. Okay, so just wrapping up, I think there's evidently subtleties here, and if we were to have and we will have a secondary conversation, and I'm more than happy to have a regular conversation.
Absolutely.
The part to jump off, the launch pad that I would like to explore more from what we've spoken about is what the one of, or the role that religion has, belief systems have in this mix.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole rabbit hole there. There's a whole other.
I mean,
Yeah.
I've got a few thoughts on those actually, as in essentially secular belief systems like Marxism, which in some ways I see as a parody of religion.
Yeah.
It's a sort of secular parody of religion, and that follows the same. It follows the same patterns, but religion offers you an avenue through which you can surrender your ego and be of service and serve. And yeah, I think
but by doing so,
and giving it something bigger than yourself, in a sense.
And does that then somehow move us from a place of accountability when it comes to ethics?
I mean, organized religion, definitely. But ultimately, the thing is, what people don't realize is that human beings have a need for meaning.
That's right.
It's almost like an instinct within us. It's like any of our other instincts. We can't, and you know, you could get rid of organized religion. We're going to find some other avenue to find this meaning.
That's right.
We have a mythologizing urge and a desire to find meaning. These are the two things we have.
Yes.
And we undermine how important these things are, but we find weird ways of satisfying these urges.
That's an extremely diplomatic and subtly beautiful way of almost explaining the intensity of stupidity when it comes to what we could believe in. And it's a wonderfully subtle point that you've made there, and I mean, there's three differences between humans and other animals. The first is that, from a scientific basis, the first is that we're aware of our mortality.
Right.
The second is that we are aware of a need to be socially fit and social animals, and to the realization that we can be outcast by not being is present, as opposed to with other animals where it is almost an accidental outcasting. We are conscious of that. And the third, so we have the mortality awareness, we have the social fit awareness, and the third is this quest for something other to believe in or greater than ourselves. That third part, which we can call teleology, which was my my TED talk in 2015, the science of telos, or purpose, is something that we are duty bound almost as humans to find that that thing, and I'm wondering whether there's different levels of that, because on one hand, the purpose of this, for instance, this vessel, the purpose of this vessel is to carry liquid, and when we used to be buried with the tombstones, only in Greek times, it wouldn't say your name, it would say your purpose. Here lies this person, his purpose, her purpose was to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
So, on one hand, there's a purpose in which our life is that we could believe in, our own internal barometer. And there's an externalization of purpose, which is to subserve to another thing that, to some extent, then means that we can hand it over. One of the parts of the 12-step program, for instance, with the Alcoholics Anonymous program, is to disassociate. Your addictive behavior was when you felt that you were in control. You have to sign up to the thought that that you're not actually in control of. This is something that's external that is in control of you.
Yeah.
And only by believing that there is a higher power that will save you, will you be able to be saved from these dark forces. And that's part of the subscription to the 12-step program. If you don't sign up to that structure, then this is not the program for you, and you'll forever be in hell.
Yeah, and in some cases, or will kill you, or for being a heretic, or an unbeliever.
It will take you to the edge of the village and be stoned to death, and it's like all the women dressed as men who are doing the stonings in Monty Python.
I mean, there are two questions. I mean, I once put to a Christian proselytizer. I said, well, I mean, is it wrong to believe? I mean, if it were wrong to believe in a path other than what you're preach, other than what, can't God do this work himself of converting people? Wouldn't an awesome entity like that be able to do? And second, by going around trying to tell other people what to believe in, aren't you taking time away from your own spiritual path away from developing your own personal connection to this divine entity that you believe in? Because you're just getting distracted. You're focusing your attention on what others believe and not on your own spiritual journey.
Yes, and in fact, there's an extension to that, which could even make sometimes an alternate argument, which is by trying to convince other people to believe in what you believe in, is that not actually taking away from their own independent thought?
Exactly.
The sanctity of their own spirituality in whatever way it manifests itself to be.
Yeah, but I mean, you give them that argument, they'll have an answer to that. No, we're right, they're wrong, and it's our duty to tell us that they're wrong. but it's sort of you tell to them from their point of view. You're just wasting your own time. God didn't give you all these years on earth, this limited time on earth, to fritter away like this. If you're that convinced that this is the path for you, maybe you should be exploring it further, getting deeper into it.
I know we're not being too unfair here to also point out the elephant in the room, which is choice supportive bias, and the reason why people want to convince other people of what they believe in is so that they feel more secure in what they believe in. Car advertising is predominantly for people who've already bought that brand to remind them that they made the right choice. Conversion from car advertising is exceptionally low, but it's very, very high in terms of whether you ask someone a year later whether they bought the right car or not, and they've, after seeing a year's worth of adverts of the choice they made, they say, yeah, I think I bought the right car. And I feel that that it's not too politically incorrect to say that a lot of conversion mechanisms in general of let's say spiritual conversion, you should believe in this, you should believe in that, is so that if more and more and more people around you believe in the same thing, then you feel that there's a strength in numbers. You feel as if you made the right choice.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you shouldn't require anything external to convince you. It's just
if it's a real belief, if it's a belief that has no transience, then it doesn't matter whether or not you're the only person in the world who has that belief. It should not matter if it's fundamental.
I mean, it's that paradox that people are scared to make mistakes. But ultimately you are going to make mistakes, but it's better to make your own mistakes, right? Rather than someone else's mistakes.
Yes, there's a beautiful quote that's linked to that, which is, it's better to be pessimistic and proved wrong than optimistic and proved wrong.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I think my concern is with organized religion. I'll use this one for the moment. That I do not have, personally speaking, enough understanding of the universe be able to make a blanket judgment as to the creator. I do not. And and I've spoken to people of many, many, many religions, and I've read papers ranging from the Dead Sea Scrolls through to Sanskrit Vedic texts, through to the Quran, several versions of the Bible, and most things in between. And from reading these things and from debating them, sometimes on stage, my conclusion is that my level of ignorance is so high that that it does not support any form of argument that could be conclusive.
But I mean, that's how it should be, though, shouldn't it? I mean, why do you need to have, why do you need to actually know? I think, just go on the inner journey and
that's right. Why do we need to know? And is it because there's a feeling of lack of completeness in ourselves if we have uncertainty? Do you think that's what it is?
Well, I mean, sometimes it's just good to be innocent. It's good to be a child.
I subscribe to that childlike mind. It's certainly something that means that we are able to be continually curious. But
right, exactly.
I suspect that well, we're living in a time now where, in fact, we've never meaned at a lower average of volume of people who are of religious nature. If you look at the members of the Catholic Church and Christian faiths, for instance, it's actually scoring far lower than it has been in the past. And that's largely due to the fact that, let's take the Church of England, you didn't have an option. It's like this. So, but now we have optional faith, and therefore a lot of people have less organized religious beliefs. Due to my ignorance of or knowledge that I'm ignorant in it, I find it jarring where there is a certainty of anything, but taking organized religions in this context.
Yeah.
I'm very concerned when people say, no, I'm convinced that this is the answer. That as soon as someone says that they're convinced of an answer, you have stopped the scientific method in its tracks. The whole purpose of the structure of scientific revolutions and paradigms, as Thomas Kuhn writes about in the structure of scientific revolutions, the whole purpose is to consistently question. As soon as something is conclusive, you try everything in your power to prove it, to disprove it, so that you can increase the step up the paradigm. It's the point of the scientific process.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the kind of I think organized religion, or for that matter, organized Marxism, does. I mean, they all operate as dogmas. It's like we have a certain first principle. In the case of Marxism, it's the history of humanity is the history of class struggle. Mm-hmm. It's not going into the complex economics of Marx. It's just basically the Communist Manifesto stuff, really.
Yeah.
Which reads like an 18-year-old wrote it.
It does, and actually, it's tremendously naive. And its lack of applicability is its primary weakness.
Right.
Equally, if we take the other end of the spectrum here, capitalism, which is a dogma that has been wholesale bought into, is something that is extremely applicable, tremendously practical, and comes with it a huge amount of upside, provided you're at the right side of capitalism.
Well, I mean, that's just I think, for example, the problems that Marx claims to have identified about inequality and exploitation, I think people like Adam Smith and Edmund Burke identified them ages before him.
True. Well, okay. Well, you could argue that there's even Greek philosophers who struck that type of thought backward even further, or rather, sorry, mixing my metaphors, but if we look at from an ontological perspective, those concepts, or all concepts, aren't new. They just are revised at the time in which they're able to be more understood. So it's an idea that's found its time.
it's sort of like, I mean, Iris Murdoch said in an interview that if you want to know philosophy, read Plato. That's all you need to read. I mean, and
Well,
she was a philosopher.
you and I have spoken many hours on video calls, and you know that I could make that argument really strongly. If someone said
Right.
argue that all you need to know is written by Plato, I could make the argument.
Well, I mean, isn't the Socratic method the most elegant approach to critical thinking that there is?
I personally believe so, yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's just brilliant. I mean, rather than simply doubting, it doesn't operate. And I mean, right now the approach we employ towards critical thinking is simply doubting things, whereas this objectively examines things, through a series of questions, and then you get to, you.
More questions. And that's the point, because if what the Socratic method does is it replaces conclusion as the outcome
Right.
with increased curiosity as the outcome. And if one is to, and that's one of the reasons why Socrates was so insanely dangerous to the empire, and which
Right.
led to his demise, of course, was that the last thing you want for a society is to be curious. That's I mean, listen, we've mentioned Orwell before in this call, but if you think about the Soma of the and Big Brother situation, you're meant to actually be addicted to a system that does not allow for a curiosity. You're meant to stay inside the cell. And Socrates, or the Socratic method, was one of probably the most dangerous weapon of humanity. And
Yeah.
and I think one of the reasons why Ethics TV had to exist, I mean, arguably the Academy of Advanced Thought was named incorrectly or disingenuously, because people are turned off by the thought of advanced thought. Ethics TV
Right.
is named Ethics TV because it is broad enough to encompass all things that involve a Socratic method of questioning, and also, luckily, is a branch of philosophy that has been around and will always be around, because it is the branch of philosophy that questions why there is a moral behavior of any kind.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. No, I think, yeah, I was, I mean, yeah, I've got nothing to add to that. I mean,
But Prashant, one of the questions around Socratic method would be, and let's do this actually, maybe in closing, and then save other topics for a next call. In
right.
closing, why do you think there is a lack of critical thinking today?
Um, I don't know. I think there's a certain impatience in the way we approach things, so we aren't willing to go into depth about things. It's got to be a yes or no answer. We want yes or no answers. We, I mean, we give way too much importance to our feelings. That's another thing. But I don't know. I think it's why is there why is there a, I mean, I think it's just laziness. I think there's a.
It's interesting because the last 30 seconds, for anyone who's watching this on video, if you pause the video now, read Plato's Chariots, the chariots,
Right.
logic and emotion, the charioteer and the horse, and then replay the last 30 seconds of your answer.
Right.
And I was almost certain that this would happen, because that's how to make my Platonic argument here. We have misappropriated the chariot to the charioteer,
Right.
i.e., taken our emotions as the thought, as opposed to our thought that can observe the emotions and choose the response. We have done this.
Yeah.
Yes, we have addicted ourselves to a binarism of needing a yes or no answer, which is simpler to define versus what's a better question or what's the process. We are addicted and hardwired addicted to have a conclusion with an absolute answer so that we can go about our day in the
Right.
hypnotic state of being a subservient citizen.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder if that metaphor of the chariot could be applied to the Bhagavad Gita as well, because it takes place in the battlefield. I mean,
It can. And in fact, there's academics that have made a direct comparison between the two. And in fact, if I were to start an argument, a pro-Platonic argument, I would start with a caveat to say that in the axial age, where there are multiple different cultures and faiths and philosophies discussing similar metaphors and learnings can be found across China, India, Africa, South America, indigenous Australia, and other areas where it seems like there was a period of time between, let's say, 3,000 years ago and 11,000 years ago, depending on your view of the Ice Age, depending on your view of whether there are civilizations before then, and how much Graham Hancock you read, there is a period of time where these ideas were the foundations of our philosophical discussions even to this day.
well, whatever, yeah, definitely. Whatever you might say about Graham Hancock, I mean, you have to say he's put in a bit of conceptual work into what he's done. I mean, he's not, it's not just comic book drivel.
I'm a fan. And one of the things that I like about what he's doing the most is that his main point is saying, let's just look. Let's just, I'm not trying to say that this civilization is better than that civilization or whatever. I'm inferring that education and archaeology hand in hand have basically blindsided civilization, but I'm inferring that. What I'm really saying as Graham Hancock is, let's just bloody well look.
And that's where the obstacle you run into is that managerial class we started off the discussion with, but talking about that managerial class. It goes against established, the orthodoxy, essentially the managerial orthodoxy that doesn't want to look.
That's right.
But it's willing to publish papers about dogs being raped in parks by other dogs.
Correct. Correct. That's the point of that hoax. And so one of the things that Graham is running up against continually on a weekly basis is the cancel culture now of people said, I think, something about the fact he was racist. I mean, anyone who wants to Google search what Graham Hancock's wife looks like would pretty much realize the ridiculousness of the Graham Hancock is racist line. But cancel culture is large.
I think there was that there was that controversy about Dave Chappelle, wasn't there, some time ago? And I think someone had the audacity to talk about Dave Chappelle's white privilege. And, that's how absurd the whole thing has become.
I feel that you, in the same way as you stopped yourself early in a point of not necessarily wanting to be slanderous about one particular biotech company. There is that you're becoming successful when a cancel campaign is launched about you. And whether you were Joe Rogan through a yellow filter on CNN taking horse tranquilizer and then winning recently the legal case about that. I think you know that you're influential when people start to try and cancel you.
Well, this is why I like a lot of the sort of English writers and poets of the 18th century, particularly Jonathan Swift. Imagine what they'd have gone through in this day and age. The level of cancellation, Alexander Pope or Jonathan Swift or
Socrates was cancelled. Literally cancelled, like as in morbidly cancelled. This is not an accident. The cancel culture of the Roman Empire was and the Greeks beforehand was death. That was the ultimate cancel culture.
Ovid. Ovid was the early victim, one of the early victims of cancel culture, and I thought that was quite audacious. And he's one of my literary heroes, Ovid. the metamorphosis. I think
Absolutely.
it's quite brilliant when you compare Augustus to Jupiter, and then come up with a story about how Jupiter raped someone.
Yeah.
And little things like that. And he was openly doing such. Eventually, he got exiled, and he probably got off lightly compared to what they could have done to him.
Yeah.
But could have
Well,
been a couple.
if you compare that to Alan Turing or Socrates, then I think
Yeah,
you got definitely likely. Shakespeare, for instance, as someone who, if you look at Shakespeare through just literary works, is one thing, a beauty of the iambic pentameter and sonnet structure. But if you look at it through a observational lens of society,
oh yeah,
it is a firstly a work of genius, but secondly, basically the same as the life of Brian was doing in as an observational role. That's the purpose of the text.
but then I think the height of audacity is, Mikhail Bulgakov, the Master and Margarita. What a work to write in Stalinist Russia.
Yeah.
I mean, right in there, and just send out your manuscript to the literary committee to look at, and I thought, and the poor man suffered and died and he and the book only got published after, but um every time I read the Master and Margarita, it's like, oh wow, he wrote that. I mean, did he really write that?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I the balls to, yeah, without being too patriarchal, the bravery
Yeah,
and the audacity. I think one of the reasons why there's this mystery around Shakespeare um, is because to give him an identity worthy of note would be to justify or verify the observations he was making at the time. It was
right.
destined to be. I mean, he's a very famous, relatively well-known landowner and playwright. There was no bloody mystery. Just if you
Yeah.
look carefully enough, there's no mystery about it. But the mystery that's been orchestrated is to invalidate the place in historical observation, and
Well,
that's the shame.
Well, he was a Catholic at a time when Catholics were persecuted in England, and that's so that put him in a precarious position anyway. I mean,
Very precarious. It's the worst position to be in the same way as Socrates is literally pointing at the emperors, saying, we should potentially discuss what's the point in empire. I mean, come on, come on. What do you think is going to happen, dude?
yeah, it's I don't know though. I mean, it's a weird kind of thing. Although we've been talking about cancel culture and all that sort of thing, I don't think we did anything audacious today. You and I would face the same kind of danger that these people face, though.
Yeah.
And we live in I think we live in a world that's got no first principles, essentially. This is one of the issues. I mean, I think maybe that's the point I was trying to get to, that we live in a world where, there are Taylor Swift concert tickets for $6,000. I mean, that's how absurd it all is. And you have a billionaire rock star charging $6,000 for tickets. And that's how absurd the whole thing has become.
I think the lack of first principles, if we were to include one of those first principles of our requirement to think critically, is definitely
Right.
there. But I agree. I think on our next conversation, what we
Right.
could do is to discuss an alternate way forward that could be a precursor to how things could be, let's say, educated and society structured, not in an idealistic way for the sake of ideology, but in an alternate way in search of solutionizing. I think the place to start our next conversation is about the first principles that could be structured for a more potential upside of society. So let's start there next.
True. I mean, I think I've for long toyed with this thought that every time we move forward, it's due to a revolution. as opposed to due to evolution. We want revolutions, but we don't want to have the patience to allow evolution to take place. So, I mean, revolutions take the first step. Say the civil rights movement. It struck the blow, essentially got rid of Jim Crow laws and all that sort of thing. But now we're unwilling to allow the evolution into a colorblind society.
Okay, well, I agree. And that's going to be the starting point of our next conversation. So let's save that, because that's a whole different rabbit hole. That's another 2 hours. So let's do this the next time. We're going to start there. And for this, Prashant, I'd like to say thanks for being part of this, and I shall see you in the next recording.
Pleasure.